Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. And I guess with that, let's jump right into some news. And it's that we're rebranding. And really, all that means that the name of the podcast is going to change. As always, my name is Toby Patan, and welcome to the Cinematiccss pod. Let's jump right in with this week's episode. On this week's episode, I speak with filmmaker Gyani Wasp and director of photography filmmaker JT Turner about their upcoming short film, Wither and Bloom. Wither and Bloom is a surreal horror tale of migration, transformation, and the ghosts we carry into new worlds. It explores the disorientation of diaspora, gender fluidity, and the intergenerational care through a metaphysical lens for anyone growing into themselves while grieving what was left behind. You can learn more about this film by visiting seedandspark.com/fun/wither-and-bloom. Listen as I speak about the project with Gyani and JT. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Gyani Wasp. I'm a writer-director of Wither and Bloom. Super excited for this new project. I just moved into my new apartment, and we're kind of christening it with this podcast, which is very exciting. So
yeah, that's a beautiful way. It's a beautiful start to living here, yo. I'm Jonathan Turner, but please call me JT. And I am a cinematographer, artist, designer, creative. I'm from Mattapan, stone's throw away from where we're at right now. That's it.
Yo, awesome.
do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Hello, both of you. My name is Toby Patan. Filmmaker, podcaster, aspiring producer and talent manager. I'd like to say, put that out there. I'm from Malden, Mass, which is like 30, 40 minutes away. And I've come to know Gyani from going to Clark together and taking classes together. And then I've come to know JT from working on independent projects around Boston. I'm so excited to interview both of you for this. And with that, I'll get started on my first question, which is, give the log line for Wither and Bloom. How would you pitch it to somebody who's like, what's Wither and Bloom?
Yeah. Wither and Bloom follows these two characters, a mother and a daughter, who've newly emigrated to the U.S. From Sikkim, and as they settle into their new place, they sort of encounter homesickness, and the daughter, or actually it's changing now. It's interesting that you asked for the log line, because when we first started the campaign, it was that the mother was the one who falls sick. Mm-hmm. And as I've been revising the script, I've decided to change it. And I initially had it like that in the first place, where it was actually the daughter who's the one who was in a coma. So the new updated log line is that there's a mother and a daughter who recently moved to the US, and the daughter falls into a coma, fueled by homesickness. So it's a mysterious illness, unbeknownst to them that it is homesickness. It's a spiritual sickness embodied in a physical way, and they've kind of run out of options, exhausted all the options within the medical system. So they turn to this alternate doctor who comes for a home visit one day, and the whole film takes place on this one day that the doctor visits.
So what I've gotten from your guys' Seed and Spark is themes such as immigration, home, belonging, diaspora, and then ancestry. And those are all so like potent but powerful. And I know that I'm sure both of you have so much to say about like how that pertains to your guys' lives and or what you want to depict, how you want to depict that through the short film. So whether that's like personal, whether it's objective, subjective, can you just like talk a bit about those themes in relation to the film?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, I feel like Moving Room is the first film that I feel like I was able to tackle those themes. And those are themes that are deeply personal for me. Like something that's greatly impacted my life is moving to the US when I was 15. Moving Room was the first sort of film that I ever made. It was my thesis film in college and the first film that JT and I worked on together, where I really felt like I was able to grapple with those themes of being diasporic, what leaving home means, and finding a new sense of home in this new country. English is my first language, but I feel like my first year here, I feel like I almost had to learn a new language. I had to learn how to speak American, in a sense.
Not English, American.
Not English, American, yeah. And so those are all things that I thought through a lot, even at that age, but not something I necessarily felt like I could process until more recently. I feel like college was kind of a space to gain more distance from that and to really reflect on how I kind of went through that, in a sense, because for the longest time I feel like home was something I struggled to have a sense of, like, sort of be stable with a sense of home, and something I felt like I was lacking for a very long time. My parents being from two different countries, Mauritius and Sikkim in India, and then moving here added another layer to that. And that's kind of what I want to address with this, is the way that like displacement changes you as a person. Like you have to adapt to the new place that you're in. And really the source of this particular film is rooted in homesickness. In that first year that I was here, the way that I struggled to reinvent myself in some senses, to adapt to a new place. And that's all the more prescient to the time that we're living in too, like you're mentioning. I think these themes are relevant to the very fabric of this country, right? In that the people indigenous to this country were displaced, and that the people who arrived here displaced themselves, and there was a huge power dynamic in that. And that continues to be a phenomenon that we observe. People come here to this country because they have to, in many instances, or in search of a better life. And that's, like, this country was founded upon immigration.
See, that's interesting. We haven't really spoken about this. Well, maybe we touched on it a little bit, but it's hard for me to like I can't relate to immigration, right? Directly, right? I can only understand it through the way you talk to it, the way other people talk through it, right? So my anchor point for this is a little different. I like try to understand immigration through like not just alienation, but like but like going through something you don't understand and like wrestling with that, and kind of especially through like dreams and whatnot, how that can like how that manifests, especially in the metaphysical, because kind of I feel like the metaphysical is like a good representation of like what's going on in the mind, what's going on with emotions, right? Like like this is like homesickness is, I feel like that's not even like a great enough word for what can happen, right? Like so yeah, I have a very like like indirect way of understanding this, but I'm trying to approach that as someone that's like kind of really like never even like I never think about home. I've never even like identified with home, right? It's a lot of other stuff going on with me through this, but just someone that kind of always consider themselves like an outsider. That's like my path to like understanding, trying to understand homesickness. So
yeah, I mean, talk a bit more about that, because I feel like I'm getting what you're touching on. Like, I mean, for me, like, I mean, you grew up in the heart of the city, and Boston is so notorious for being racist, like not accepting, like very like just. I've had people come from like Philly and like be like, wow, it's so racist here. Like, people are so quick to be racist. People are so quick to judge people that speak English as a second language. And it's just kind of like, I feel like me being a child of immigrants, my dad would tell me stories of him getting pulled over and then like cops like calling him slurs and like stuff like that. So can you talk a little bit about your experience as like a black man being from and spending the majority of his life in Massachusetts, and like how that has made you feel an outsider, yet at the same time it's still your home. So it's just kind of like that dichotomy of like, I'm a little bit resentful of calling this place my home because of how it treats me.
oh man, so like this is gonna be a lot, right? Like so firstly, like I don't have direct experience with Boston being racist, but I have a ton of indirect experience, right? Like, we could go deep or we could go shallow, like touching.
Go deep.
So I'll skim off the deep part, right? Like I'm like twice everybody's age here, so I'm from the era after busing, right? And the whole busing, there were like riots here, and like white people didn't really want black people to go to school with them, and that kind of segregated the city. So I'm from Mattapan, a place where it's crazy to like. I never think about this, but when other people go to Mattapan, they're like, yo, there are only black people here. 360 degrees. It's like weird to see a person, like not just like a white person, but like an Asian person in Mattapan, right? Like it's so black. But on top of that, as I was growing up, I think some sort of civil war in Haiti was going on, and there were a lot of Haitian refugees where I was from. The kind of projects that I was from was called Haitianville when I was growing up. And if you want to talk about like alienation and like kind of like this weird internal form of racism, like I remember when they called Haitians like African booty scratchers, right? It was like it was such a weird time, but like people didn't really mess with Haitians. Like now it's different, right? Like people understand, like, yo, Haiti's the first place that rebelled against the slave masters and found their independence. Like people take pride in being Haitian, but when I was growing up, it was like, yo, you kind of tried to keep it on the low, right? Like your food was different, like your music was different. So that's kind of where I was with that. But like in terms of my upbringing was different. You know, like the elementary school I went to was super mixed. The middle school I went to was in Mattapan. It's not far from here. It's in Mattapan. I was basically all black with mostly black teachers. And the high school I went to was like 90% black as well. So it's, and not just like yo, like one of my high school teachers was on PBS as a black historian. So he was like drilling in like I call them black legends, right? He was hitting us with all that stuff like, yo, there used to be this place called ancient Nubia, right? He would tell us stuff like that, or like, yo, the Romans or the Greeks went to Egypt, they saw the Sphinx, it was a black nose, and they knocked it off. Like, that one's a little more spurious, right? But like, in terms of racism, I haven't really experienced it directly because I was in such a black community, but that black community exists because of racism, right? And I don't know, I didn't travel like, and then it's not just like, I'm from Mattapan, but like Roxbury, another place I'd go to, used to be all black. Dorchester, another place I would go to, used to be all black, right? So like, and that was like I didn't really go, I rarely went to Southie. When I did go to Southie, it was like, it was a little weird, but I was like 11, yo, I don't know what racism is. Yeah, so.
It's so interesting hearing your experience because, like, we grew up maybe, like, 30, 45 minutes away from each other, but my experience kind of parallels Gyani's a little bit more, just in the sense of being raised by immigrant parents who really prioritized education, which made them, well, for your parents, I'm assuming they made the decision to send you to the United States for your education. You went to Waring School, is that what it was called?
Yeah.
Remind me what town that was in again?
Beverly, Mass.
Beverly, and I too also was kind of like, for lack of a better term, not really bust, but like I drove out to go to private school as well. And you also went to a private day school.
It was a private school.
Yeah, I went to a private day school in Lexington, so it's like, I was always the only black kid in my class. And there were maybe a few Southeast Asian students, a few East Asian students. Rare, but even when I went to Malden High School, one of the most diverse high schools in the city, but I don't think I had any black teachers. And that's kind of such like a weird thing to grapple with, because it's like, okay, it was really hard for me to see a future for myself. And then I think, you know, it was just kind of like, I felt kind of like a basketball being thrown on different sides of the courts, like, and then ultimately when I want you to talk about your experience with this, Gyani, ultimately when I came to college, I was like, okay, where do I go? I'm going to join the Black Student Union because I don't feel at home with black people, but even I felt like an outsider in the Black Student Union because I was like, I honestly felt like I wasn't really embodying blackness in the way the other students who grew up around black people were. And I felt like internalized racism in the sense that I thought I was too whitewashed because I had like spent a lot of my time growing up around white people. All my extracurriculars are white students, like sports teams were white, music classes like were white, and it's just like I was very much odd man out. Even in college, I was usually the only black kid in my classes. So I guess the theme is like, I want Gyani to talk about your experience growing up in predominantly white institutions and how that has kind of like shifted your mindset and how that bleeds into this film.
Yeah, I mean, prior to being here, I wasn't like surrounded by whiteness. So that's also a very interesting contrast to be raised sort of in early childhood in Mauritius, and then in Sikkim, where there was an element of still feeling like an outsider there in some senses, right? So because I couldn't speak Nepali initially when we moved, because we moved when I was in like the 4th grade, and that was just a weird time to migrate in a sense. Like I was just becoming aware of the world around me. And then when I landed here, like that was a very different move in the sense that, number one, my parents were not with me. I had no connections to family who were here. So I was entering a completely new world in a sense, as far as like familial ties go. I'd always gone to the same school as my brother, and that was no longer the case either. And I felt, like it was interesting to be dropped into that kind of situation. I don't think I fully knew what I was getting myself into, and it was primarily sort of it was kind of my push and my real like drive in a sense to come here that I ended up here. Like my parents like ended up being okay with it, but it was mainly facilitated through the principal of my school, who's half American, half Siamese. So Waring was the school that he went to when he was a kid, and that was the connection. But that, like, I reflect upon that experience and I think about it in ways that, like, I was very innocent and naive, not really knowing what I was getting myself into, yet I was so determined to make it happen at all costs, because of this idea of what America was. But also that in some ways I knew that I couldn't do what I wanted to do, which was film back in Sikkim. There was just like virtually no opportunities for that, no role models around me who remotely like were in an artistic field, period. And so it was all about kind of figuring out like how can I sort of get more opportunities and be more proactive to be able to do what I want to do. And that like moving here seemed like a great opportunity to make that happen. But when I did come here, it was like a whole new revelation in a sense. Like I didn't know what I had signed up for, and then once I was here, it was like time to do the best with what I have, which was like definitely in so many ways I'm so privileged to have been able to make that move. But at the same time, I was in this position where being here, I was living with all these white host families, moving from home to home. And so I was observing various different microcosms of like cultures within households, domestic cultures in a sense, but all white families. And that was something very challenging in a sense. I think I sort of adapted to a lot of that. Maybe in some sense it's like assimilated rather than integrated. And that's kind of what I try to articulate through Moving Room. It was like all of that was happening internally due to the pressures of my environment in a sense. But that's how we end up back in like the metaphysical realm to a certain degree. And even what you were talking about, JT, in terms of like you not necessarily feeling like you experienced racism directly. And I also don't necessarily feel like I've experienced it very directly either. Like no one's ever really blatantly sort of discriminated against me to my face or like called me slurs or anything. However, the form of racism kind of takes place more systematically, right? Where it's like the system around me at these predominantly white institutions didn't care for my background in some senses. Like people were genuinely curious, but the system itself was set up in such a way that there were so many more hurdles to overcome. There were no sort of accommodations or understanding for the background from which I was coming from. And it could be as little as something like, I remember having to sign certain forms because I was still a minor, like to get your parents' approval, and I was like, I can't really do that. And so it ended up having to be like the case that host parents would sign it, but they were not like my actual parents. And that within these households, I was constantly like forcing myself to present as the perfect guest, because that's also like a cultural thing that's been instilled in me from being from Sikkim. Like that's a huge part of the culture, is respecting elders and kind of showing reverence for the sort of hospitality that you're getting. And I felt like a guest in these places. So I could never really show what I truly felt, whether that was the way that I would react if like I was at home with my parents. I'd feel a lot more free to express anger or sorrow or just like these emotions that like I ended up having to repress in order to present myself as the perfect guest. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
We know once you suppress those emotions, they come out. They have to come out in other ways, which I feel like that was kind of Karma's, I guess, confusion in Moving Room. As there's a lot of things happening, like even though it's just from one character, there's a lot of things happening around Karma that are like yo, what's going on, right? Like just kind of like a storm of emotions, so or a storm of energy from this other person that's like, oh my god. But yeah, that stuff comes out, and I feel like the metaphysical metaphors are like very, very helpful with that stuff. So
yeah, it's trying to articulate things that you couldn't otherwise articulate in words. It's not like as clean cut. I feel like it's these more nuanced things that we experience that are really hard to put into words. And like how I was saying that I had to learn how to speak American. Like I feel like there's a physical mechanism in the way that your voice operates, but I've totally, like I have an American accent now. Like so I'm able to.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. You have no accent. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. What? So how long did it take you to like, kind of like I would say get rid of that?
I mean, the thing is, I don't think I got rid of it. When I speak to my parents, my accent changes. So I'm code switching.
Oh my god.
In such a way that like I didn't have that language, like the word or phrase code switching was not something I kind of had the vocabulary for until I got into college.
You mentioned code switching, which is like, it's funny. So I obviously grew up around a lot of like black people. I grew up like not just around a lot of black people, but in the crack era, like hip hop like really taken over. And I remember the first time I was away from black people is when I started working at the Apple store. And culture's totally different. It's like I didn't even realize I was like completely around white people. It's like the Apple store, right? So everybody's like kind of cool, right? So I didn't really like look like, these are a bunch of white people, but it would be weird, like just from being where I'm from, it's like I'm way more aggressive than than the norm. So that's something I had to work on too. I had to completely change like my vocabulary. I used to like curse and all that, AAVE like 90% of the time. That had to go away. But it was cool to experience. Like now I look back as a different culture, but then I was like, these are just like they were into some of the things that I was into too. Like even though I was like primarily hip hop, I was still listening to like alternative rock was big, and like electronic music was big. So that's how we kind of crossed paths. But like, I didn't even realize I was code switching, right? Like I built this whole fake identity while I was working at the Apple store to just survive at the Apple store, right? And then to like continue to sell stuff. But that's like, that accent thing is like, whoa. Yeah, and then it's, like now again, just like an anchor point for that, I had to completely switch up my demeanor when I worked there. So
because God forbid you fall into the angry black man stereotype. Like, what could that mean?
Yeah, which again, I'm so old that like wasn't even really a thing, right? Like these are newer things that we're starting to acknowledge, right? So I just didn't want to get fired.
Exactly. When your livelihood and like survival is wrapped up in it, that's when it becomes like different. That's when it becomes potent and powerful. And it's like it's kind of like there's an author who I'm not going to be able to quote exactly, but they paraphrase it by saying having these different experiences and identities give you kind of like a third eye that the average person doesn't have. So it's like when you're walking down the street, you have your two eyes for vision, but then you have the third eye that's kind of also serving as a lens to how do I like self-preserve in a world that could be racist to me, in a world that could be xenophobic to me, in a world that could be transphobic to me, in a world that could be homophobic to me. And like that is just like all of these things are like thrown into this pot here that we're all kind of experiencing. And I kind of like that leads into my next question of I want anybody can share. I mean, GT, I don't really know if this will pertain to you, but I want you to talk about queerness in the role it plays in your lives and in turn in the film.
Yeah. I mean, Moving Room kind of, again, articulates a lot of what my sort of breakthroughs were. I feel like, again, I was saying like that through college, I had this safe space and was surrounded by more queer people. And so there's sort of power in that and feeling seen or recognized and safe, number one. But then also number two, like intellectually coming to terms with that. I would say that they almost happen parallel to one another. Like my journey, like in sort of coming out as non-binary, paralleled my journey in kind of accepting that home was never going to be an easy thing for me to grapple with, kind of for similar reasons, in that like first I was able to intellectually process and kind of apply it to myself, at least like the constructs around gender. Something at first I intellectually realized, like understanding that this is sociologically constructed, right? And that in society we act and perform in these ways. Before then, the next step there was like, I don't think I was applying that to myself and seeing like, oh, how am I performing? What are my thoughts on that? And that was kind of a huge revelation, in that then I sort of felt liberated through my coming out as non-binary, that I didn't have to adhere to certain ideas of what it meant to be masculine or a man in a sense, which is how I was raised. In that, like, and I see that, like, those traces throughout my life growing up. Like, back in Mauritius, I felt when I was in my early childhood, it was way more acceptable to be more vulnerable, more feminine, things that we associate with femininity in a sense. And that I definitely, like, sort of, I empathize with. I identified with those things. But then when I moved to India, it was a much colder environment, that masculinity was more pushed, because I also hit puberty around then, and so those kind of social roles start to take up even more pressure on people. And that
India's like, I don't think people like think about it, but India's like hyper masculine, which is like I don't know, it's like I've seen a bunch of Indian bodybuilders and all that, right? And like I mean, the mainstream media reflects that. You have these Bollywood stars, like all the men are like, you have to be insanely jacked to have any role. So it's insane. That's kind of the portrayal of what masculinity looks like at face value in the mainstream media. But I think that in some senses it was affected also by the schools that I was going to, but also like that there is this sort of heightened sense of masculinity in India. And this is like, to a certain degree, a generalization, because India is a huge country. Like in Sikkim though, I definitely felt that. And Sikkim is a place that's kind of a pocket of India. That's actually used to be its own independent kingdom before it was annexed by India. But I think that what we feel in some senses is that like the weight of colonization kind of taking place over centuries, and the aftermath of that like all these institutions are built upon that. So then once I kind of like came out as non-binary, it gave me the insight to not only see gender as a social construct, but also nationality as a social construct. And that was pivotal. I was in an international cinema class where we read this famous Bengali author who actually wrote the national anthem for India, which is kind of ironic. But he despised the idea of nationalism, and traced its roots in the West, in Europe, and that's how it kind of took place. And the reason that nationalism exists is in order to unite a group of people who might not necessarily otherwise have a common cultural background. But then what you end up with is a country like India, which never was a nation in the first place. It was a subcontinent with various different regions, various different languages, and people that look different. Like the number of times I've sort of told someone I'm from India and gotten weird looks is like insane. Like people don't know that Sikkim is a part of India. Even within India, I'll go to other parts of India and they'll say, are you Chinese or Japanese? And it's crazy.
And that again goes back to talking about nationalism, and that this is actually a socially constructed thing in order to fight wars, in order to rule people under one name, and that it doesn't allow for the subtle nuances between cultures, not to mention different languages and regions within a place. It's that you have to filter it all through one lens. It has to be under one language. And that just doesn't fit with my identity. Being from a tiny pocket of India does not reflect the majority of what India looks like.
Yeah.
And so that was a huge revelation, having both of these things happen at the same time, in that, yeah, both of these things are actually social constructs. And actually, once I'm aware of that, I can sort of live my life in the way that I want to, free from these ideas, at least internally, but obviously there's still the external that exists. The way that society functions still does not take these things for granted. It's like we still operate with these ideas in mind, right? And we're constantly encountering physical mechanisms that perpetuate these ideas. Just like right now, applying for a green card. And that process is crazy.
Can't even imagine.
Especially right now, it's like
Yeah.
as they're like going like Gestapo on people, right? Like, yo,
I'm thinking like you have to be living the scene in Julio Torres' Problemista.
Oh,
you know
yeah.
the scene I'm talking about.
I'm living that.
Where he's like climbing through the roof, and then like it's just hurdle after hurdle, and it's just like a cycle, like a never-ending cycle. It's like you need this much money to like pay this lawyer to like be proving this, but then you need to be working this many hours. But you can't be working this many
Well,
hours.
it's crazy. I looked at the total filing fees cost for a green card. It's $3,000 right now, and it's like the whole idea behind that is you have to pay the U.S. government to apply for a green card in order to work, but you need to work in order to make the money to pay the government that money. So it's like a cyclical thing.
And it's designed like that on purpose.
Yeah.
Which is just like, okay, so now what? What do you want me to do? So it's just like your personal being met with this institution, this like higher thing, and it's like, how do I exist in line with this? It's just a constant, like, it's like a positive force and a negative force, so you're just like, and that takes energy, and that takes time, and that takes mental space, in addition to being a person who's just trying to live their life to the fullest.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm constantly like trying to think how to relate this back to queerness, but it's just kind of like, in a way, I do feel privilege, similar to how you kind of mentioned that you feel privileged, because my parents aren't perfect. Like, I'm a transgender man, and I've been out as a trans man for a number of years, but like, my parents weren't always perfect. But I got really lucky because, more than anything, my parents really know how to love. And so they've loved me throughout every iteration of who I was. Not to say that they weren't, they're immigrants. When I was growing up and expressing gender outside of the norm, they didn't know what to do. Like,
where your parents from?
Nigeria. They're both Nigerian.
You got some. With that said, you got some like great parents because they don't really play.
No,
right?
I don't. That's not a thing. Like, being transgender isn't a thing in Nigeria. I mean, that's not to say that there aren't transgender people, but it's not like a widely accepted thing. And so, and on top of that, they're extremely religious. And so I'm just like, with that being said, like the fact that they don't treat me any lesser, they haven't really tried to suppress me, they have just let me do my own thing, they've supported me, they've accepted who I am with stride, like, they're not perfect and nobody is perfect. And for context here, I was doing a lot of my transitioning outside the house. And so I've moved back home within the last 6 months, 9-ish months, and this is kind of like, this time has allowed me to really like appreciate them and notice how their support is not easy for them, but it's also like their support makes me show up so much better for everyone else in my life. Like, you know, not a lot of queer people of color get that support, and that's why I'm appreciative of it. And it's like, yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, they're not perfect. They definitely, I can see in a lot of conversations we have where religion takes precedence. Like for my dad, I would say that, like, you know, some of my thoughts on gender and being a personhood, his thoughts on religion will kind of like outweigh that. So it's like, okay, I can't really argue with you there. Like, you believe in this, I believe in this, but like, they won't let their beliefs impinge upon my existence and right to live happily and right to exist. And they, from as long as I was a little kid, they were just like, you're gonna live your life like separate from us. However that's gonna manifest, it needs to manifest. If that manifests in me needing to be on hormones and transitioning, they're like, go for it. And they take that with stride, which I honestly wake up every day feeling so lucky, because not everyone gets that. Not even everyone gets that. And so it's kind of like a long way to be like, when I met you, Gyani, I was like, I remember saying this to you, but I was like, who is this like cool, like artsy, like queer person of color that like I need to be friends with? Because I feel like we just kind of had like that kinship. But it took us getting to know each other to be like, wow, our backgrounds are so similar. Wow, are we like it was just like crazy, like how we had such different experiences, but our backgrounds were so similar, and how we related to like home and belonging and immigration and queerness and gender, albeit, you know, with all that being said, like with all that thrown in there, with all that being in the pot. And that's why I'm so excited about Wither and Bloom, because I'm constantly like itching to see queer people of color tell their own stories on screen, because it's just like, yeah, how do you know, this might not be rational, but it's like you need to see that to know that it's okay to be that.
So I want to hop in, because I like, me, like, oh man, so many like just kind of like privileges here, right? It's like, talk about being in your own world, like, cis straight man, right? I grew up in the hip hop era, right? It's just like wild amount of homophobia, right? And not to mention like big black dude, like if there's one thing I've always felt safe in my body, right? Like I don't even have to think about, I can't walk here, I can't walk here. It's like people kind of like clear out as I come through. So yeah. But like, it wasn't until like, again, like, the Apple Store is like a weird type of college for me, because it exposed me to so many different people. Along with being around these like white people, I was like hanging with like, gay people for the first time. Like, there were people I would chill with for so long and like didn't know they were trans, right? It's like, oh, so that went from like, just being like, just kind of following what I grew up with, which is like, homophobia, dropping a lot of F-bombs, right? To like learning like, oh, there's a whole culture here. Like, these people are cool. Someone gay, like my buddy Paris, I consider this person like a big brother to me. Taught me so much about like, how to dress, how to be fly, like how to have aura, basically, right? It's like, right? Like you don't get that in like the heterosexual space. If you do, it's very one-dimensional, hard at all times, right? Where it's like there's just so many other shades of things, and like again, like I experienced that at the Apple Store. Apple Store is like, like truly diverse in that way, and it definitely, it definitely opened up my eyes. Yeah.
Like, who would have like thought that like a huge corporation would actually have had like such a positive impact on your like upbringing and worldview? Because it's like
it's like my first time kind of stepping out into the real world. Being in the hood is like, it's weird. You don't think of it that way, but you're sheltered, You're sheltered in like violence and like kind of one-dimensional thinking, but stepping outside of that into a space that was like crazy diverse was definitely eye-opening, and I like that was an awakening for me. That was like one awakening for me. It's like, like it's cool.
And like on the flip side, like I feel like I kind of came from a sheltered upbringing. And I'm like, where do I find that middle ground of like, because I constantly feel like I'm still searching for a Black community, right? Because it's like the cities I frequented, unless I was in school, not my classes in school, I was not amongst the majority of Black people, so I still feel like I'm chasing that. And so when I sit down and talk to my parents, both Nigerian immigrants, and they are like, being Black doesn't even really exist in Nigeria because everyone is Black.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, okay, I don't have that. It's like, what if I was to like wake up in Malden and be like, being Black doesn't exist because everyone is Black. My life would be so different. But I kind of also have to know in the back of my mind, it's like, sure, if I was to be born in Nigeria, I wouldn't be Black. But if I was to be born in Nigeria, I wouldn't have the opportunity to flourish in other ways. I wouldn't have the opportunity to be an artist. I wouldn't have an opportunity to be queer. I wouldn't have an opportunity to transition. So it's just like, I'm constantly like weighing back and forth between like, it was a sacrifice for my parents to immigrate here so I could be myself. I mean, they had a whole other, like, they were coming for immigration, they were coming for a better life, etc. But then again, it's just like, at the cost of, well, if I would have been born in Nigeria, then I wouldn't have to think about Blackness. And I already have a Black community. So it's just kind of like, the cards I'm dealt with here is just like, I'm reckoning with both of those things. Like, I love being from Massachusetts, but it's like, what if I was from a place that had just a little more Black people? It's like, that's what's always in the back of my head. And so I'm constantly reckoning with that.
It's crazy how this stuff is intertwined, right? By this stuff, I mean like kind of art, right? So like, it's crazy how it's funny too, like that like Western canon is so straight, right? Just because like, if once you start looking into this, even like how many Renaissance artists were gay, right? Like Da Vinci, right? Like
they're gonna free with it,
right? Like what, Caravaggio as well, right? But that stuff is a part of Western canon, and like the homosexual aspect is like almost like not acknowledged, right? Except like, right, if we're talking, God, what's the first movie Tilda Swinton was in? That was heavily influenced by Caravaggio. But it's kind of one of those things like, if you know, you know, right? So, right. And I think about like, we have Western canon, but we also have like art house cinema, which like Wither and Bloom is, but it follows this other string. Like, this is a super tangent, but like I'm learning the history of disco and how it was like based, like gay and trans people were banned from like regular clubs. And this is like crazy to me because this is like where underground culture comes from, right? Which is something I always look to. It inspires me in art. Like, what are you sleeping on that's gonna really affect you? Yeah. Whether it's music, film, right? And like, disco is like one of the roots of that, right? like this is where these people went to like free themselves, to like actually be themselves. You can hear it in the lyrics, the dance music, and disco was also destroyed. Like the whole disco sucks thing, which I'm learning is like, yo, like not only do we hate disco and there's a commercialism aspect, but like, yo, we don't want y'all here, right? This is why disco was like destroyed, but it came back in the form of house,
Right.
right, and techno, and it's like yo, and but you don't think of these things as like inherently like gay unless you know, right? So, but I look at like Western canon of film, like Spielberg and all of that, and which is like he's great, but there's this whole other this whole other kind of aspect of film that we're trying to tap into, right? And using completely different languages and like kind of making up languages. It's like I don't know. I just find it fascinating, these different like trains of thoughts and kind of like the history of things and what we're tapping into, and how these kind of identity politics are very interwoven in art, right? So it's like you have to consider that stuff if you're an artist.
Yeah, I remember like a pivotal moment in my like film education, or whatever you want to call it, was literally at the tail end of my senior year of college, when I was like working on my thesis film, and my thesis advisor, Soren Sorensen, we all know him, we all love him. He was like, you should watch Tongues Untied, Marlon Briggs. And that changed the game for me. I was like, wait, like film can be like this? It doesn't have to be like Scorsese or Spielberg.
Yeah.
It can be like this. I was like, whoa. And that was like a huge moment for me, and how I'm summarizing what you were talking about with history of disco and all the media that bled into, is that, yeah, black, brown, queer people are the tastemakers.
Yeah.
And we will always be the tastemakers, yet we will always be
Marginalized, yeah.
and marginalized. And it's just like, it's that stands true today with how 95% of our vernacular is AAVE right now, and people are capitalizing on this. Especially like I see it in live performance and comedy. Like a lot of like alt comedy now is mostly just like white people using AAV, and like that's how they're making money off of us. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe be better comedian. But that's a tangent. But you touched upon the idea, JT, of surrealism, and Withering Bloom is a story that you're planning to tell through a surrealist, horror, magical realism lens. So I want both of you to talk about how you're going to break that down for the viewer, from the DP's perspective, from the director, writer's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes right in line to like what we've been talking about in terms of, yeah, I had no idea Caravaggio was gay, or Da Vinci. That's like super, super interesting. And that's like, there's so many other sort of identities that I feel like go unnoticed. But in some senses, I feel like what I value and what attracts me to certain works is actually more focused around the affect of them. And this is something we've talked about in terms of Moving Room, and something I learned in a gender and film class in college, where we were studying The Matrix specifically, and that has become such a pivotal text for me as a text that represents affect before representation, you know? And I'm a huge proponent of representation as well. I feel like that is very important, but I think what personally I resonate with more is the side of authorship and the side of ownership, in a sense, where who is the one telling these stories, right? Like how does my identity as someone who's lived through the things that I've lived through reflected in my work. And I feel like that's honestly something that I can't help in some senses. Like filmmaking and art is just such a subjective form that you can't help but sort of imbue your life experiences upon the work that you touch. Your work is you. Every work is a self-portrait in a sense. And I honestly think that kind of chasing, in a sense, like objectivity or wanting to come at it from a neutral standpoint is almost misguided, in that we'll actually never be able to get there, so why even try? And so my sort of philosophy is to enter the work from a point that completely embraces the opposite. Embrace everything that makes it myself, in a sense, and lean into the experiences that I've had to then say that, like, for example, like Moving Room was in some senses representational of the life that I actually living with host families, but that's where we touch upon the metaphysical, and in that the Matrix itself too is a body of work that reflects what it feels like to be trans before it's what it looks like to be trans. And that, in some senses, to me, is way more powerful. The whole film, the language constructed around the film is trans in and of itself, in that anyone watching that, whether you are picking up on it or not, that is what's going on here. It's that the language is developed, and that language specifically, like the allegory of that, is something that fascinates me a lot. And I'm seeing parallels across cultures. The Matrix, in a sense, is often like compared to Plato's cave, right? The allegory of the cave, where there's the idea of this guy who's locked in a cave, and he's tied, he's bound so he cannot even turn his neck, and he's facing a wall, and all he sees are these shadows, right? That is his reality. But then once he's unchained, he's able to go out and see color for the first time, see the sky for the first time, and he goes back in and tells the others who are trapped about it that he's completely sort of shut down. There's no positive reception. That's kind of the parallel of the Matrix there, but also I see that in the Buddha's journey, in deep, like, Buddhist philosophy, that the Buddha was essentially, he was a royal, he was a prince of this kingdom, and he never left the walls of the palace until this one day that he encountered a sick man, an old man, and a corpse, as well as a bodhisattva, a monk, meditating. And that changed his world forever. And it's that sense of kind of being within these four walls of the palace. I would almost argue that that's the cave, that's Plato's cave. And that actually stepping outside of that reality, you understand that there's more to it, in a sense. That, in a sense, like, each film could be a cave in and of itself. That we're what I'm trying to do is not only represent the world that exists on a surface level, that, okay, this story is about Nihara and her mother, and that they've just moved to the States. But actually, it's also a story that goes beyond that on an allegorical level. Like, how can we fashion the language to actually access these thoughts? Because I find that we have this incredibly potent medium that allows us to access what we wouldn't access in words. Like, words is a form of language, but that cinema is its own form of language, and that you can create a film that actually feels like what it's like to be homesick. Because it's almost impossible to even, like what you were saying earlier, JT, you were saying it goes beyond just homesickness. Even I'm finding that phrase is not enough to describe what I actually want to describe, but it's the closest approximation I have to it. But it doesn't even begin to get at the nuance of the experience that I actually felt. And so we have to invent new language to access it. That the story has to work on these multiple levels. And that's where the metaphysical comes in. It's like this whole other realm. It's this other plane of existence. You have the physical realm, but the metaphysical is what goes beyond that. It's spiritual, right? It's not centered in the tangible. Homesickness is not something you can touch. Like, maybe you can touch physical objects that remind you of home, but you cannot touch homesickness. But what would it look like to touch homesickness? And I think that's what we can access through filmmaking.
Yeah, and JT, I want to know how you're bringing your perspective, or how you plan to bring in your perspective as a cinematographer to touch upon these themes in understanding that it's so complex, and understanding that you have to kind of mentally understand these different planes of existence and backgrounds and identities that you might not necessarily share to yourself, but it's your, I guess, responsibility, or your task as an artist to do this in the most tactful or artistic or serving the story way. So I just want to, what's your plan for that?
Oh, I have so much here, and this is why I love working with Gyani, because even though I feel like even though our backgrounds are very different, we end up at the same places. So there's, and like a lot of my own personal philosophies, which I'll just like go over, but there's a couple of core things. I don't even know which one to hit first, but this is like, I guess I'm like a student of Bradford Young, and Bradford Young's whole thing is like, this art form is very personal. And this is like why I like working with Gyani. It's like, because Gyani just gets this, but you have to like kind of get naked and show yourself to be able to express this art. But I mean, like in a like we have to tell each other our stories, which are like painful, right? Like before a few days, like I didn't know Gyani came here at 15, like alone. That's a lot, right? And I have an opposite perspective. Like I'm still in my hometown. I'm like 2 miles, like maybe a mile away from where I grew up, right? So I'm not there, but I still know those feelings of like loneliness and alienation. Another thing is, I forget the cinematographer, but one of Tarkovsky's cinematographers would say this, but he was like, Tarkovsky, I think this was for Mirror too, but Tarkovsky was telling his story, and I'm secretly telling my own story.
Wow.
Right? Which is like, that's like, whoa. Right? So, and it's like art is so dope, because if we're a business and somebody had their own like secret agenda, that's like, whoa, bro. But art is like different. Something new comes up in the tension of like telling kind of different stories, but
it's the layers.
Exactly, right? Exactly. And if it's not obvious yet, like a quote from Nocturnal Animals, this film, which is like kind of like a mainstream film, but it touches on something. It's like, all art is an autobiography. You're either conscious of it or you're unconscious of it, right? My story, like riddled with darkness, right? I grew up in the crack era. Like this building we're in right now is very likely somebody was hunched over in the corner smoking crack here when I grew up, right? So like I've seen crazy things growing up, seen crazy things in high school. So my life is like riddled in darkness, right? But even in like, I feel like, how much of this do I want to say? I feel like in one of my films, Snooze Buttons, it's got a horror element to it. But the horror element is the element that wakes the character up. It's actually not a bad thing, right? And I feel like there's an element of that in Wither and Bloom with the doctor, aka the Hat Man. If you know about sleep paralysis and all that, these are like very, very interesting things where this guy that comes in and looks sinister may not necessarily be sinister. It may be a catalyst, right? And just to keep the tangent going, are you guys familiar with the Memory Palace?
Yeah.
All right. So the Memory Palace, this is I think it's a Greek technique for memorizing things. So you use as a human, your spatial awareness is very powerful. So you can, and right now in your mind's eye, you can walk through your house. And the whole story of the memory palace is, or the technique of the memory palace is, if there's something you want to remember, put it under your bed. Imagine yourself putting it under your bed. Imagine yourself putting it in the cabinet. And you can file all these things and pull them. But the way this technique came about was from a horrible earthquake. Earthquake happened. This philosopher was there. I forget his name. But some of his best friends were like crushed by rubble. And it's like horrible graphic scene. And they were pulverized so much that when they came to like retrieve the bodies, nobody knew who was who. But this philosopher knew every single person because the experience was so traumatic. So his version of the memory palace was using kind of violent imagery, right? To bring us back, like this is what horror is for. You can sneak your message into something scary. There's no gore. Actually, there's a little bit of gore in this with the hands, right? Picking up the root, just a tad. But in violent imagery, you can hide messages, right? So that's like kind of the bright side of the darkness, right? It's like trying to use horror to deliver these messages to. It sounds pompous, but to wake people up, to expand people's thinking.
That goes right into like the Buddhist philosophy that we were discussing
suffering
just on Thursday, right? Yeah. Suffering and happiness are two sides of the same coin. That you can't actually separate those two things. They do go right with one another. I think you're so right in saying, JT, that like, and that's again going back to the Buddhist story. Like that's what he was encountering for the first time in his life, was suffering. And that's the thing that like is hard to admit in some senses, but Buddhist philosophy accepts wholeheartedly. It's centered around suffering, that actually suffering is integral to the human condition. Like we all suffer, we will always suffer, we have stuff. Like it's just not something you can escape, and the more you run away from it, actually the worse it gets. That really the only way to move forward is to embrace it. Like, hold your suffering close, embrace it. And that's the way to move forward, to transform it and wake up.
Yeah, still struggling with the whole suffering thing, but
It's all
yeah. It's like, oh my gosh,
I don't think
my bus again.
I got my coffee order wrong.
But that's the thing too. Is like I just mentioning podcasts too. I listened to this podcast with one of the disciples of the Vietnamese leader Thich Nhat Hanh, like, and he's been a practitioner for decades, and he admits to still struggling with it. It's never something that just becomes easy. I think you just keep working on it, even as a monk. It's like crazy.
Yeah. You would think that.
Right. You'd be all enlightened or something, but it's constant effort being put into that. Like we're all on a journey to get there, but
it taps into that universal truth. Well, that was my last question. But if there's anything else, anything you want to add?
I know you wanted to talk a little more about the metaphysics side of things. I don't know if we quite went there fully, and process, I guess. I don't know.
The metaphysics and process, I think it's super interesting, since you and I we kind of find this anchor point in Murakami's work, who Murakami is like definitely a formative author for me, because like, talk about suffering. Like there's been some moments of darkness where I'm like, okay, I have to dive into Murakami to like bear this like breakup or whatever, right? So and I know you like there was a time where I was like looking at Murakami's work, and like I had these like with Cream I was like, yo, this short story he wrote called Cream, And Cream was important to me because Cream is like it's like the distilled version of every one of his novels, and that's when I began to see his story structure,
the pattern. Yeah.
And I was like, whoa. And it's funny that it's called Cream because it is the distilled version of all his novels, and it's basically like
it's the cream of his work.
Like the same thing. This kid who's already depressed is usually a boy or a young man who's already depressed, already kind of a slacker, runs into a girl that does something kind of messed up to him, and it's like, actually not even kind of, it's so messed up that he can't wrap his mind around it, and he slips into a metaphysical world to deal with it, learns a lesson that he doesn't understand, and comes back.
I need to read this book.
And it's like it's like every one of his books, but Cream is a short story. So you don't have to go through like 500 allegorical pages, right? You get it.
Yeah.
If you
it's
read
distilled,
Cream,
I feel like in that version, like
exactly. And like once I read Cream, I was like, oh, okay. Then I started analyzing my own stories, and I'm like, oh, my stories reflect that too. And then when you told me you transposed Cream to write Wither and Bloom, I was like, oh, whoa, okay, so we're touching on something.
Yeah.
Not only that, but like Murakami heavily inspired Wong Kar-wai, which is somebody that we look up to, and it was like, again, to bring the queer part into it too, it's just like someone that heralds that, right? Like, so
it's interesting that you bring this up because same author that wrote Wind Up Bird Chronicle. Right?
Yep.
Okay, and I remember getting that book from the library. I'm like, this is it. This is gonna be that moment. I'm gonna tap into this author, but it just didn't. For whatever reason, I couldn't read it. Like it just wasn't clicking, and so I'm hoping that this project this might be the time in my life where this work.
Wind Up Bird is. Have you read that one? It's dense. I feel like it's kind of. I tried. That was also the first Murakami I ever tried reading back during the pandemic.
Oh, same.
Because I had so much time. I was like, this is a thick ass book. I'm gonna pick this up and see if I can get through it. I think I ended up stopping about halfway through it.
I barely got the first few chapters.
But then more recently, right before I wrote Moving Room, I read Kafka on the Shore, and that was more accessible in a sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
That kind of like I was able to buy into what the themes are, like what are the rules of like the worlds that he creates essentially, that then help me get to Wind Up Bird, because Wind Up Bird is also slower. There's not as much that happens, and Wither and Bloom is somewhat similar, and Moving Room too. I feel like not much necessarily happens.
It's
but
internally a lot happens.
Internally a lot happens, but actually like the day-to-day, the mundane, it's like this weird juxtaposition where the mundane kind of meets the surreal and like extraordinary. It's weird. It's like two polar opposites kind of meeting in the middle that I think is just makes such a fascinating like atmosphere.
So it's funny that y'all say that, because I don't think I would have been able to read either of those if I wasn't so depressed. But I didn't understand those. Like, those books were a true escape for me. I didn't understand those books, like, from in terms of plot. If you ask me to describe them, I can't. But the vibe, I was reading that and I was finally like, oh, this is how I feel. Even though I don't understand it, this is how I feel. And as an artist, I'm coming to find like, these are the things that I want to touch on. Yeah. That's why when you told me about Moving Room, I was like, okay, boom, let's go. This is like, these are the things I'm trying to tap into. Same with Wither and Bloom. It's like, something like bigger than the understanding. Like, which in this day, I'm starting to understand that these things that we don't understand are actually like emotions in the internal like universe, right? Yeah. That we're not really taught about, at least here in the West. I feel like back in India, I feel like they have more of an understanding. Like, oh, you're angry, take some time, right? Here it's like, oh, you're angry, time to go. Like crush your enemies now when you're angry, right? It's just different, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
But maybe again not, because India's like,
I feel like the whole world is we're entering this weird phase where it's like this weird homogenization of like globalization.
Yeah.
In a weird sense, where I feel like we're losing so much of those old like ancient wisdoms in some senses. And not that like it's ever been perfect in the East either, but I do feel like we are straying further from that. There's more of an emphasis on individualistic mindsets as opposed to collective ones.
And that's a huge Western thing. It's a huge Western mentality.
But,
which is crazy, right? Because it's like the whole thing with like Western culture is like colonization.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like you're taking the many and like putting them under one banner, right? It's almost like you're trying to turn everybody into one person.
Exactly.
To serve the one person in charge, which is like, whoa, relax. Yeah.
That being said, though, I feel like it's kind of, again, two sides of the same coin. And this is something we were talking about the other day. Like, in some ways, like, the ways that history has happened affects everyone on this insane level. Like, I would not exist if not for colonization to a certain degree. Like, my parents would not speak the same language for one, would not be in the same city, and therefore would have never met, and therefore never would have had me. Like, that's weird to think about.
Yeah.
So at the same time, it's like this push and pull in a sense. Like, you can't escape the sort of events of history in a sense. But how do you move forward with that?
Yeah.
And Murakami also touches upon that, because I feel like he pulls the East and West, like, pulls them in together, like, and gets to this weird place. It's always this place of limbo, right? Like, Kafka on the Shore, Colonel Sanders is like a character in that, and he plays like a spiritual, like, what's it called? Oh, like a pimp. He plays a pimp, but it's like weirdly spiritual. I don't like it's so weird. It's so weird.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
You know? But at the same time, I also hear what you're saying in terms of his work being like understanding the vibes of it. Like, and that's what affect is too. That's how I understand it. It's like, I'm not necessarily trying to have a viewer fully understand everything that happened in the film. It's like, but if you felt what was happening, if you felt the vibes of that, the atmosphere of that, that's what I'm trying to privilege. And that's, the metaphysical world too. It's like it operates in this weird nuances.
Which something Murakami touches on a lot is colonization and like Japan's failed attempt at colonization and like reckoning with that is this almost in every one of his novels, which I'm only thinking now. Yeah, and
there's always a tie to the present too, which I think is fascinating. It's the ways that the history shows up in the present. And how you can never escape that.
Yeah, damn, are we Murakami's disciples? This is crazy. Yeah.
This episode was brought to you by
which I like that though. It's like again, like it's just like representation, right? This representation is more like nebulous and more just intangible, right? It's like people who take a look at this world and like, oh, yo, this world doesn't make sense until you start looking at history, and then it's like, oh, like, yo, we're just kind of in this fucked up place. There's some beauty here, but in general, like, it's, yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. As of this episode release date, Wither and Bloom has reached their fundraising goal, though they are currently location scouting. So for more information on that or to help with this process, follow them on Instagram at witherandbloom.film. Thanks for listening.